Awesome. So I'll start with Geoff, just with a little bit of background on you, mate. And there's a hell of a lot of background there, which is pretty interesting especially for me, and I'm sure everyone that gets to hear it. But born in Kenya and spent your early life in Uganda, and escaped the Idi Amin regime with your family, flying in a Cessna 175 Skylark that your dad piloted, landing in Townsville. Now, I Googled the 175 Skylark, and mate, I can tell you, I would not want to be flying in one of those from Uganda to Townsville.
No, it's a flying tin can, that thing. I don't think we'd fit in it now, all fully grown.
So schooled and spent most of your younger life in Brisbane, and then your first adventure started off as a solo bike ride from London to Nairobi in Kenya, and then but it ended up being a bit of an odyssey with three mates living on $1 a day, arriving at the Sudanese border to find it being blocked by civil war, which must have been, after such a long trek, a bit of a letdown, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
And in 1988, you had a bit of a near-death experience trekking up Mount Kenya with a mate of yours, and you woke up in the middle of the night with a headache, with your tent frozen over, not able to light a match or get anything going, and unable to wake your mate, and finding out that you're in the later stages of carbon monoxide poisoning.
Mate, it's one of those things where I reckon if I'd had a torch, I probably wouldn't be here today, because I rolled over to try and look at the time to see when we were meant to start climbing again, and had a lighter, couldn't get the lighter to light, so I'm flinting it, and I had flint. I could hear gas coming out of it, and then your brain's so foggy in that late stage of carbon dioxide poisoning that it took some time to piece everything together and go, well, hang on, we got gas, we got flint, something's missing here, it's oxygen. And I opened the tent, and there's this like 1 millimeter thick ice layer that had sealed to the ground. So the whole tent was basically just a completely sealed unit with two of us in it. And as soon as I cracked that, the lighter could start, and I worked out it was 4 o'clock in the morning, which was an hour earlier than I'd set the alarm for. So I don't think we would have survived another hour, because it took me 20 minutes to wake Aubrey, my climbing partner, up. He was, much further gone than me. And, I've just had my 50th birthday on Friday, and on a post, I just sort of recounted the near-death experiences like that I could remember. And, there's probably 8 or 9 just very quickly. And I totally forgot about this one in that post. And my son said, oh, Dad, because he knows the stories better than me. He said, you forgot about this one, you forgot about this one. And then you realise, geez, no wonder I was grateful to make it to 50.
That's it, definitely. Moving on from some of your early adventures, the next 10 years of your life you spent starting off and growing in your passion for veterinary care, and building your own little veterinary empire, I guess, which today, obviously, being a part of running the Vet Love group of vet practices in southeast Queensland. And I know that you're incredibly proud of that group of veterinary care practices and the staff that you've got with you there, who are all amazing, having spent heaps of time talking to you about that. But obviously this passion led you away from adventuring. So I guess then it came to 2004, would have been a pretty interesting environment where you ended up after the Aceh earthquake and tsunami, where you're on the ground in a recovery position, helping out with the recovery there. And that really, from what I understand, led you back to your passions of family and adventure and philanthropy.
Yeah, I think so. It's always that juggling balance for any entrepreneur or creative, to not let what you're creating start to dominate you and pull you away from your first love. And I think without the Aceh experience, potentially I could have ended up on the scrap heap alongside a lot of other jaded, tired veterinarians who've just let the clinic or the hospital or whatever it is they're building just suck the life out of them, and potentially out of your marriage. My marriage, we were probably in a bit of a dry period because I was working too hard, And you know, just seeing the volume of death and loss, and over 1,000 interviews with people who didn't have much to start with, but debriefing with them, and I was translating from Indonesian to English for a French medical doctor. And say, for example, a guy would come in and he had a deep laceration under his arm down to the bone, and the doctor would say, ask him how he did that. I just want to know if we need to worry about tetanus. So I said to him, you know, what cut your arm? And rather than just tell me straight, he would then offload his whole story, and he's saying, listen, I had my 2-year-old in my right hand. I was holding on to a log with the right, and we were getting pushed inland by the remnants of the wave. Then part of a roof came up and just severed my whole arm on that side, and I dropped my child while I found something else to hang on to. She got pushed on the other side of a building that was floating past us, and I never saw her again. So then I would turn to the doctor and go, it's a corrugated iron cut. You need to worry about tetanus. So she was taking on a little bit, and I was taking on a lot over and over again. And when I got back from that, I mean, recognizing now PTSD, I would have had some form of PTSD, and, you know, started playing Xbox till 2, 3 in the morning and drinking too much whiskey, and not being the bloke that Sarah had married. 3 months later, she came to me and said, listen, you're not right. You need to go back to Aceh, and whatever road you took there, go take the other path.
Yeah. And
so that's what I ended up doing. I ended up going back to Aceh 3 months later, and that was really healing and curative. And Katali's just made a short film for my 50th with a lot of adventure footage in it, and he scanned through over 10,000 photos. He stumbled across a folder of some of the pictures from that period, and I don't think he'd ever really anticipated the volume of death. Like, you couldn't walk without popping your boots through people's backs. There were women who died in childbirth with dogs eating the babies. You know, just images that no human being should see. Over 250,000 dead in the one town I was in. So, you know, to come through that, get through the other side of it, and then come out with a renewed passion for adventure, but twofold, you know, getting people back to their roots, getting them into the wilderness, exploring the absolute edges of human endurance, resilience, but then bringing that passion back into veterinary science, where, you know, we have 4 times the suicide rate of the general public. So we've got a real mental softness that's crept into the veterinary profession, alongside having access to lethal drugs very easily. Yep. In a hard-working, underpaid profession. It's a lethal cocktail. So funnily enough, the wilderness stuff has really started to be, you know, high impact within the industry. So it's kind of all tying together finally.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that wilderness stuff, not just an impact on your industry, but on anyone that hears about it. You know, some of the things that you've been able to do, you know, the longest land journey ever by kite across the Sahara Desert is one. What else? The first ever kite surfing expedition across the Torres Strait between Australia and Papua New Guinea. The fastest unsupported crossing of Antarctica under wind power, which was nearly 3,500 kilometres in 53 days. And then obviously your most recent one just in January of this year, before all the COVID issues hit the wider world, where you set a world first. And I liked this part of your blog that I'd, you know, obviously followed while you're on your journey, where, you know, at 4:10 a.m. on the 4th of January, you dropped the kite and you'd arrived at Novo Station after travelling nearly just over 5,600 kilometres to set the record for the longest solo unsupported polar journey in history, which is just mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah, and that, I mean, the longest solo was something that I've been chasing for 7 years. So to get over Dome Argus, we had so much red tape on that. Like, it was a freaking nightmare trying to get permissions from all the countries we needed to get a journey of that distance ratified. And right in the middle of it was this whacking great Dome Argus, which Mehrtens is the highest part of the Antarctic plateau, and brutally cold. Like, you know, very, very, very cold. Coldest naturally occurring place on planet Earth. No one had ever crossed it, let alone used it to get a return route home. So the end of that journey was quite amazing. You know, I really felt like, okay, let's put the boots up for a while and relax. But the human brain is amazing. You know, you think if you'd asked me halfway through that journey, would I plan another endurance event at my age? Probably not, you know, but we have this incredible thing. And, you know, I think for a professional rugby player like Mehrtens, the real irony is that your physical prowess definitely peaks in your late 20s, early 30s, but your mental prowess really is in that late 40s, early 50s, even up to late 50s now. You're much more mentally resilient. And in a polar environment, there's a definite crossover there, which I felt I was pushing the barrier off, because my recoveries on that last journey at night were not what they were 6 years previously. But, you know, we smashed every endurance record that existed down there. So once you've recovered, your fingers and feet can be felt again, you start to dream. And yeah, it's already, you know, thinking about another endurance event.
Mate, I'm kind of not ashamed, but just it pales. I mean, we talk about a team sport. Sorry, Simon, to jump in, but I mean, we talked about preparation in the context of a week of training, whether it was individual training or team training, for 80 minutes on a Saturday. I think of one of those journeys, one of those sort of odysseys, Geoff, and the preparation that goes into that. It must be incredibly fulfilling, just the various types of preparation there is. I mean, from an outsider, from a layman, I look at that and think, well, there's your own physical preparation, there's a mental preparation side of it as well. There's the logistics you've got to work out. You've got to have a meteorological understanding and awareness and stuff like that. I mean, throwing in the political red tape that you've got to go through as well, all the different facets that you've got to put into place over goodness knows how long, months, possibly years, before thinking of taking on something like that. It's just, I mean, it makes you look at sport and go, God, it's a bunch of pampered individuals, which, you know, in a lot of cases, we certainly prove that.
Yeah, but I think, you know, there's a real skill in getting all of those individuals to work so well. And I think that's something that the All Blacks have shown over 2 decades now to be absolute masters in, is just getting everybody's skill sets to merge and keeping the humility there. You know, one thing I love about the All Blacks is that they clean their own locker room. You know, that simple concept, just keeping people's feet on the ground and making them realize they're, you know, that they're not greater than anyone else, and keeping that team thing going is phenomenal. You know, there's a real skill in getting a team to push in the same direction. The solo journey has its own challenges mentally, but it's much easier to manage than a team. And we had 13 guys on that Sahara crossing, and man, I've never worked with more difficult individuals. Part of the reason I go solo now is because of that journey. So, so the team thing, I mean, it's just phenomenal what you've achieved in your career, and the All Black.
Yeah, you're right. Pulling together a whole bunch of disparate individuals has its own challenges. I mean, in that rugby context or professional sports context, it's maybe not as challenging as in business, because by and large, you've got people who have been through pretty similar experiences over their lives. They've got pretty similar motivational angles to be in that position and in that team. So, you know, while it's different individuals, they've all got quite a common focus. Whereas you look at business, and I've never run my own business, you've set up your own very successful businesses, and bringing different people together when you've got potentially different ideologies, different motivations. You know, some people are more motivated by the individual achievement than by the group achievement, or whether it's money that comes into it. And I guess all those in a business context have to be respected and nurtured to get the best out of each individual. But like I say, you know, while there are a number of different moving parts in a sports team, you've got to bring all that together. It's you know, I guess compared to the challenge of bringing that together in a business context, it seems a wee bit easier. I'm not trying to downplay the footy, because, you know, it is a constant work on in a rugby team. You know, you've got 80 minutes to work well together. Quite often your work is not giving you immediate reward personally. It's helping a mate out, but it's helping the broader collective effort. So there's all that sort of stuff. And You mentioned the All Blacks. They've been very good, what I think, in the last 10 years. Firstly, in focusing on the basic skills, the absolute essentials of the game. You know, if you can't pass and catch accurately, then, you know, the bulk of a rugby game is gone. You know, if you can't make the tackles, if you can't be physically up for the battle, then again, that's a big part of rugby. So really focusing on those absolutely essentials and hammering those, that's one thing. But I think the other thing is, as sports evolved, certainly for rugby, which only went professional 25 years ago, in the early days of professionalism, you know, everyone focused on the physical preparation, the training in the gym just to get stronger, and we got you know, a lot more awareness around that. But more recently, it's been that mental application and the mental side of the game, whether it's, you know, how you're making decisions, what your visual cues are for making decisions on the field, what your visual cues become when you're under duress. You know, in a game where you're losing by, you know, it shouldn't make a difference to your next task, but you're losing, it's a different context, can make a difference to people, can affect their stress levels and their decision-making ability. You know, you're under time pressure potentially from people running at you, a big guy running at me, which I was never good at and still am not. That's a different sort of a duress. So they've worked really hard on that mental side of things. And I guess it's about focusing on the next task. And going back to your context, I mean, there are some things you can't actually control, but you've got to still go into a huge, you know, trek like you did, thinking, okay, what happens if this goes on, if I get hit by the worst blizzard that's ever come across this coldest part of Antarctica? It's a long way to go, by the way, just to rescue an injured penguin in my books, but well done. But obviously those sort of things out of your control are something you've got to cater to without being able to control, obviously. We
almost need to simulate in our head before you get into that real crush space is kind of think ahead. Okay, we're actually doing this thing at the moment where it's a 7-minute audio piece that starts with me strapping into the aircraft. You're in this Russian Hulk and you're flying for 6 hours over the Southern Ocean, and the whole time your brain is going, do you have enough? Are you going to be tough enough? What's going to happen? Then you land and there's audio of the sleds getting unloaded, and then audio of the plane shutting its engine bay, taking off, and then you're alone. Start walking, start hauling, and then your first email is, listen, there is the worst blizzard in 50 years on its way. And this was my first Antarctic journey, so I didn't have a lot of polar background or experience, and I didn't know what was survivable and what wasn't, but I could tell that the weather forecaster was shitting himself for me, thinking this guy's a relative rookie, he's about to get turned into a red smear on the side of Antarctica. And then just, you know, at the end of the audio, the wind is starting to rise, you're building your tent, you're building an ice wall in front of it, and you're bracing for the storm coming. And COVID-19 for a lot of businesses has been like that. You know, you're getting the forecast, this is going to be the worst blizzard we've seen in 100 years, financially, physically, emotionally. You know, a lot of business people out there are asking themselves the questions that I did as the wind is starting to rise. We can see that there's an economic headwind coming, potentially an economic blizzard. It doesn't hurt us to ask those questions before the storm is upon you, and start building your strategy for mental health during that time. How am I going to alleviate stress? Because for a lot of people who might see this, they are the single key, most important factor in their business or their family. And if they blow up mentally, then everybody suffers. So it's about preparing your storm strategy, getting your tent absolutely pitched, perfect, building some upwind objects that are going to push the winds over the top of your tent, and figuratively getting ready for the storm. And I think that's a lot of the time when I see people have a complete mental wig out, they put no time into the prep for the storm. And probably something I'd really love to get across to corporate Australia is you cannot act surprised when your tent gets flattened if you haven't pitched it properly and you haven't got prepped for the storm. So, you know, developing mental resilience is a lot easier if you've actually put the time in and started to do some stuff. to get yourself strong for it. And I think it's probably exactly the same for you, going into a game that you're expected to lose, or you know, you're the underdog, you're coming in there, you don't go in with poor self-belief and expect to win. You've got to put the time in and prep yourself mentally for a win. I think that's probably what I'm trying to say in a long roundabout way, Simon, is whether it's footy or polar survival or business, you've got to put time into your mental health. And you know, the great thing in Mert's and my career is there's been a big shift. 20 years ago, nobody talked about mental health. You just see people wig out and they tap out early and leave the industry or kill themselves in our industry. And not much was said. Whereas now we're given permission to talk about people's mental state the same way we do talk about the flu.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a massive step in the right direction.
I guess, Mert, you've done a good job there with my run sheet and avoided us talking about your history. So that's probably a sign of your humility. But it'd be remiss of me not to maybe just throw a couple of points in, mate. Obviously, you know, everyone knows one of the greatest All Black fly halves of all time, if not the greatest. 70 tests for the All Blacks, 2 World Cups, a dad and a grandfather who were involved in New Zealand sides. And then obviously you've also gone on in your life to work in the corporate world, and you also in 2006 appointed a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to rugby, which is you know, obviously a fantastic achievement as well, and you know, being a bit of a fan favourite for a lot of people in the media. I guess again comes down to not only your efforts on the field, but your humility and your sense of humour as well, I hear. So probably just important I throw that in there for you.
Mate, I like to think I gave ordinary people hope. I think they look at sports, big, athletic, strong, fit people, and then they see a bloke like me and go, well, if he can do it, we all can. So I like to think
I don't know about that. I've seen you play many a time, Mertz, and you are the complete athlete, so you're very humble.
Well, I mean, we've all got, as you know, we've all got strengths and weaknesses, and I was never going to run through people, and most of the time couldn't run around them, but we had people who could do that. I had teammates that can do that, and I guess I tried to bring what I could do, which was yapping. You do need communication, of course, and it's very important when you've got 80 minutes on the field that there's a kind of a reference point for the rest of the team to listen to, that, you know, a constant voice, and I guess I could provide that, maybe a bit of vision. And vision, when people say vision or you've got quick hands, it was mostly the fact that I wanted to get rid of the bloody ball as quick as I could so I didn't get smashed.
So for me, you know, I realised at the end of the last journey, for the first time in my life, for 7 years, I've been pushing towards the longest solo, breaking the records of my heroes. And then suddenly I was there, and you enter this kind of vacuum where you're like, well, I'm really immersing in this, I'm enjoying it. But I realise without a dream, I'm a bit lost, you know. So practicing what I'm preaching, I've started to build that dream, which would be the first Australian crossing of the Arctic Ocean in its entirety, and possibly the first human to get to both poles of inaccessibility. So I don't even know how that's going to happen, but it's my stretch point. It's what I'm starting to dream for. Immediately, I find that I'm getting out of bed earlier. I'm starting to run again. I'm doing weights again. I'm starting to have something that's waking me up. So that's probably the first key to resilience, is make sure you've got something that you can stretch that window with. On the other side is a really simple process called hormesis, which is if we rub our skin on something rough, you know, this is the mouse, but assume that's rock, and I'm rubbing my fingers across rock hour after hour after hour. If I go too long, I'm going to rub the skin off and be down to meat, and then my fingers are useless. But if I just do it a little bit each day, the skin starts to get tougher, and then I'm able to climb better. I'm able to push myself a bit better. Every cell in your body is attuned to this process of hormesis. So that's why when you're in a period of stress for too long, it's damaging. But if you can step in and out, what you'll find is you're getting this process of hormesis, and you're developing resilience over time. And the amount of time that you can stay on the front line on the battlefield before you're retired out, gets longer and longer and longer, and you're developing this incredible resilience. And I think in our modern culture, there's this whole concept with all of the tech stuff coming through that the young guys are where it's at. You know, they understand the tech. Guys Mert's age, my age, where the old has-beens, what they don't account for is this incredible resilience that's been built by hormesis over 20, 30 years. We'll be the last men on the paddock, last men standing, last women standing. So that process is something you can do in ISO, and it's just about getting uncomfortable regularly. And it's not just about self-torture. It's about, it can be simple. Put your hand in a freezing cold bucket of ice. First off, you'll only be able to do it for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. Slowly increase your strength. Start doing hill sprints. You're terrible at it initially. That period of discomfort, your stitch comes on quickly. You'll slowly see this happen, and building resilience in that area will affect everything in your life. So, I think there's been a horrible tendency to, in our schooling system, try and avoid kids going through hardship. Jimmy's got to win everything. Even if he comes dead last, he gets a ribbon. It's not building hormesis. And then when Jimmy gets thrown into the fish tank at 17, 18, he's won everything in his life. Suddenly he's in the real world. There's no one there to give him a ribbon, and he's incredibly mentally soft. This is what I'm talking about, like avoiding this softness, getting our kids to understand hardship is good for you. It's character building. This period of toughness for our Australian youth right now might be the absolute making of our country in the next 20 to 30 years. I think it's been a long time coming, and we're developing character in our young people like we haven't done in 100 years.
Cheers, thanks. Enjoyed that, Geoff. I wish I could have got access to you while I was still playing. It probably would have done me a lot of good. But I mean, like you say, you prepared yourself for some incredible stuff. It's not everyone that can do that, but it doesn't mean they can't apply some of the principles to their daily life and their own targets and goals. I mean, it's not everyone has to be setting world record goals and stuff like that, is it? It's just having some purpose, having achievements on the way, and remaining focused on what what your next task is and how you can achieve that, and being optimistic that it's not something that's beyond you.
No, and I think that's the thing, is the thing about my story is that I was never the athlete, never, I love sport, but I never excelled at it. And it was really later that I realized the endurance mindset and the endurance physiology. But it is something that I can teach to anyone because I'm Joe below average. If I'm built like Jonah Lomu, I can't look someone in the eye and go, hey, you can play as well as me. And they're looking at him going, well, you're built like a brick shithouse. I can't genetically transform myself. But with me being 80 kilos dripping wet, I'm at the tail end of my adventure career. Everything that I've achieved is through mental resilience and toughness. I can pass that on to these young ones coming through, and they don't have to make the mistakes that I've made. And I think, my passion for our industry and for Australians in general.
Just a last offer for me, sorry, Simon, before you sign off. Geoff, if you're looking for a partner to do any of these things, then I can put you onto someone if you need someone being a little bit offside constantly while you're in one of these long treks. And Richie McCaw is certainly getting into the side of things, mate. If I could volunteer a connection there, then I'd like to do so.
Mate, it's 6 degrees of separation. I train in the backcountry in New Zealand a lot before these expeditions, and we've trained all over the world, and I still find that the backcountry New Zealand is the best, just because of the people you bump into. And but I bumped into a farmer there. I think Richie's a glider pilot, isn't he? Is he not? Yeah, and
his grandfather, I think, was a champion glider pilot.
Well, he crashed a glider into this valley, and I was training in the same valley in the winter. And this pilot said, "What is it with you people?" In the summer, he'd come in to help this crash pilot, and Richie McCaw steps out. He's obviously a hero of his. And then in the winter, there's this crazy Australian polar explorer in his backyard. He said, "I don't know what it is about this farm, but it attracts idiots from all over the place."